from US to give his talk today is AI in Pathology Education. Please, Professor.
Trước hết thì tôi rất là biết ơn được mời đến và xin nói lời ơn cho đoàn tổ chức hội nghị này. Và rất là vui mừng mỗi khi được quay trở lại quê hương thứ hai của mình ở nước Việt Nam. So I would like to speak about the role and potential of AI in pathology education. We have some unique demands in pathology education and a wonderful new opportunity to address standardization in pathology, improve quality in training of our pathologists, and hence improve patient care in more places in the world. I know there are still many towns in Vietnam that do not have a well-trained pathologist there to provide accurate diagnoses. And so this is one avenue to improve that situation. I have only one disclosure, and that is that I am learning this material also. This is all coming at us very quickly, and so we all have to be students to become better users of the tools that are being provided through AI. So I asked one of the AI generators to provide an image to begin my talk based on the title. And as you can see, this is total nonsense. It makes no sense. And that illustrates one of the important lessons. It's a learning process, and if you aren't persistent and attentive, sometimes your diagnosis or your education may be totally meaningless. So I refined my prompt and said, show me a wise professor teaching an audience of interested listeners about AI and pathology. Well, it's still not very good, but it's getting better. And that is one of the key lessons to take, is that this is a learning, progressive process. This is a better example. A couple of my colleagues who are helping to develop content to make that easier for people in the developing world to learn lung pathology made a video. So Dr. Mukhopadhyay and Dr. Sacchini had a conversation over a lung cancer biopsy. And they made that as a recording of their Zoom session. And so then we said to the AI tool, summarize what they said. Identify the key learning points. And indeed, within about 30 seconds, we had 1 page, 2 pages, 3 pages of key learning points for that content that they had made. Conversation turned into an outline. That is the great power of AI. But, you know, it's kind of boring. And here we are after lunch. This is the time of day when perhaps many of you are used to taking a rest. And if my talk is boring, feel free to put your head down and take a rest. But AI can also help with this. So we asked a different AI tool to take that content and generate a song. I used to learn things by singing songs. I taught my children how to learn the ABCs by using songs. A, B, C, D, E, F. We have all done this. There is a very noted neuropathologist in the United States who has written wonderful songs about glioma, astrocytoma, pinealoma, medulloblastoma, each one itemizing the key pathologic points in a wonderful song. Well, AI can do that too. So, this was the song. We'll see if it works. You'll have to go search on YouTube to find it. But the song summarized all of the things in a very jazzy, upbeat way about mitotic figures and nuclear folding and making the diagnosis and the differential diagnosis and all those things in a way that would be memorable for a student. It was not very good at spelling, so as you can see here, it says it's a badly spelled mitotic figure. So this is no longer just a toy. It is very rapidly becoming the way and the tool of choice in education for educators who are preparing material, but also for the learners who want to become more effective and efficient in learning. And this is going to be able to help us to solve some of the challenging problems that we face. So what I'd like to do is show you 5 use cases where these tools can be used to enhance and overcome challenges in education. So the first of these is generating good examinations. Many of my colleagues hate to write examination questions. And AI can give you an advanced step forward by taking all that content and generating good summative questions for evaluation. They can be based on specific content, and you can adjust the level of complexity, how hard the distractors are, how hard the wrong answers are, and also provide answers, explanations of those answers, and even your questions can involve visual cues, images, and so forth. We're not quite to the point where you can take a digital slide and turn that into, but I think that's very, very soon coming. A second area where AI can help the learning process is by overcoming the barriers. When we think about the barriers to learning, distance, language, age or generations, culture, these are all barriers for some people to understand. For example, if I spoke in a southern twang with idioms that are common in the U.S. South, you would be completely confused. But with AI, we can often translate things. Maybe you had the experience of trying to teach your children or learning as a child something that was at a very different level for you. So here's an example of the kinds of questions or tools that you might use, a prompt that you might use with AI to generate an approach to learning. So I want to explain this word, neologism, to my 5-year-old. How would I do that? Or I want to explain lipidic lung cancer to a medical student. Or, here's a culturally appropriate one, how do I explain tech to a person who's from the Hopi Native American clan? Very different, and so forth. AI can also cross the language barriers, translate this lecture into Farsi or into Vietnamese, or explain this pathology report to a person who is only educated from primary school. These are all barriers to learning and understanding that AI can help us automate and simplify and that's make better. So here's one example of neologism. You and your friends are playing outside, and you find something that doesn't have a name. Maybe you found this really cool rock, and you want to say, wow, that's a holy rock. Nobody knows what a holy rock is. You've made a neologism. And that's how you would explain that. A second, or are we third? This is a third. A third way that AI can be very useful, of course, and this is a tool that maybe many of your students, and maybe you have used already, is to automate and make more robust the note-taking process. So almost all of the Zoom meetings that I participate in now, we have an AI tool taking notes, capturing slides, and summarizing action items and key points, so that after the meeting, we can be more effective. Many students in other cultures use Otter AI or other types of AI tools to do the same thing to enhance their understanding of the experience. And likewise, simultaneous translation is virtually the next thing happening with AI assisting. So thus we cross the language barrier, the slowness of our minds in ways that are very, very significant. So I took one of those slides earlier and said, translate this slide into Vietnamese. So what do you think? Did the AI tool do a good job? I was impressed. It would take me hours to do that kind of a job. So there is a great potential to make all of the world's literature, all of that knowledge, very readily available to your students using these kinds of tools. Of course, we still need to be selective. We want to make sure that we choose the best articles. And that's where the pathologist, the professor, has to be in the loop and helping to guide the student. Here's another example of crossing and using this barrier to use the AI tool to enhance learning. And also to accelerate the efficiency of the pathologist. So if I assign my resident to watch this video, I might want to have it for me or for him to summarize the key points and then to make a test question based on the content. So this is what it came up with. 3 key teaching points for one case, and then a question. What is the classic finding in pilomatricoma that helps differentiate it from calcinosis cutis or osteoma cutis? And these are the choices it gave me. But I looked at those choices and I said, that's too easy. Make it harder. So, it did. Bingo. A case, a person, a patient. This is the finding. What are the expected descriptives and so forth. So it made it a little higher level. Maybe a second or a third year resident would now have a little bit more difficulty with this question, whereas a medical student might have been able to answer the other one. So you can titrate and adjust the need to what is present. One of the big challenges with evaluation and assessment is the open-ended question. As you probably noticed, when you get a new case, you don't get a similar sheet of paper that says, choose the right diagnosis from these 5 diagnoses. It's not a multiple choice exam. You have to describe what you see and then develop a differential diagnosis and then choose that diagnosis and defend it. Well, that learning process of describing is very difficult to evaluate. We do that as we sign out back and forth and so forth, but it's very difficult to test that. And this is an example. Here are some Native American textiles, and what do you see here? How would you describe that? And is someone seeing it the way they should? Well, a rather famous American artist in glass might look at those things and say, this is what I see. This is what I've created to mimic those textiles. Or another artist, a painter, might say, well, this is what I see, angles and colors and so forth. So these large language models can help us to take an open-ended process like this and do a couple of things. They can provide suggestions as to what the boundaries ought to be, or they can generate the open-ended question, or they could be able to provide a rubric or a framework in which you could evaluate the response to that question. So if instead of showing a student textiles, I showed them a glass slide and said, describe what you see, the LLM could take that same material and provide a rubric about what sorts of things they should be able to identify from that slide. You should be able to identify the tissue. You should be able to identify the stain. You should be able to identify the components of the tissue, and so forth and so on. Just as you might have a similar answer to that other question. So I wrote a response to what that picture was. And it said, this is the evaluation using the rubric that we have established that the AI tool said. Well, there were some good points. They had the right vocabulary, they identified the variety, and so forth and so on. And then it also identified some areas where they could improve. Now imagine that you're the student and you have written this response and gotten this kind of feedback. This is very helpful feedback in the learning process. And from my experience in our training situations, the young residents and the trainees are hungry for feedback as to how to improve and where to learn to see better. And we as professors don't do that very well. We say, oh, you did a good job today. Oh, I'm glad you identified that thing. That's about it. But here is very detailed analysis of what they might do better and how they might accomplish their goal of learning to see what we see as pathologists even better. So this is an area where many of the AI tools can help you to do this. Well, I'm sure that you have heard not just about ChatGPT, but have probably also begun to hear about PathChat, which is one of these foundation models, but it's very specifically oriented towards pathology and pathology images. It is a chatbot that allows you to have a conversation with the AI tool about the image, about the slide. So you can ask PathChat to describe an image and maybe compare that to what you see. You can ask it to suggest possible diagnoses based on what it sees and the foundation model that is there. Now that's also a very useful tool as a student, to be able to use that and to see, okay, did I see that as a possibility? Why did I not see that? Or what are they seeing there? So this is intended to be an application for education or for diagnostic work where the pathologist is in the loop. This is the important concept, that the AI tool is not in isolation, but is in the process and controlling that process and quality checking that process so that when our name goes on the report, when we sign off on that student, we feel confident in what we have ascertained. So these are the kinds of prompts that a student might say, you know, I'm thinking about this interdifferential diagnosis. How does that compare with what the path chat is thinking? Or I think the diagnosis is X. What features of X are not here or are here? And here's an ill slide, but illustrating that several of our tools are beginning to install this type of AI into the image management system, so that right there, as you're working, as you're learning, as you're studying, you have access without changing computers or going to your phone or going to another application to use that tool within the context of your learning and teaching. So this is Raj Singh and Anil's project together, and this is an example of how that would appear. This is the history, this is what we're singing, or thinking, this is what the histology shows, what else should we be thinking about, and what things are here. So it can give you very detailed text analyses based on the information that you've provided. Now, of course, there are a couple of important things there. One is that you have to trust it. Now, I don't know, I have not talked to very many retired people who sit around the park in the morning and watch people exercising and maybe go for their walk and they do their exercises or play badminton. But sometimes they start to tell stories. And in the United States, as people tell stories, especially if they have time on their hands, the stories tend to get better and better and better, and maybe a little bit exaggerated, maybe a lot exaggerated. The fish goes from being this big to being this big to being this big, and so forth. And there's a lot of concern that AI may make up things. And we've seen examples. So here's an example. You ask you ask ChatGPT or Gemini and say, tell me about the historical significance of the Battle of the Burning Ham. And it makes up a story. It sounds plausible, but it's all completely false. And that risk of filling in gaps where there are gaps and making things up is not what you want to have when you have life and health on the line, when you have important learning things going on. So believability, verifiability are important things. And there are a couple of ways to take that into account. So one of the ways to do this is to have a custom GPT that's based on a specific data set, your cases, or this set of the literature, and so forth. And there are apps now that are using highly referenced data sources that will help to do this, open evidence and others such as that. And these generally have restricted public sharing so that you don't risk, taking one case and contaminating the internet or whatever with that case's misdiagnosis or something. Sometimes they use a tool called retrieval augmented generation, which basically adds value here by taking the prompt and enriching it through an iterative response through this kind of a circuit. So this is what that might look like in structure. I'm a 62-year-old man with a lingering cough, a smoker. What conditions might I be at risk for? Well, that searches the relevant information and then generates some things back to then take the what conditions issue into the large language model and provide a better response on that process. So this is one way to limit the confabulation, is to use these types of structures in the LLM. That's probably beyond what we're doing, but just so that you know that that capability is there. Now, evaluation is very important. This is one of my heroes, a steeplechase star who won the United States Olympic trials, but fell down halfway through the race. He fell down going over one of the barriers, and he went from being in the middle to being about 50 yards behind everybody else. But yet he came back and won the race. Enormous story. But in track and field, we don't just measure who won. We also are competing against ourselves, and we see how much we have progressed or improved in that particular event. And so even though we give 1 medal or 3 medals, there really can be many superior performances based on individual improvement. And that's what we'd like to see in pathology, is not just one bright star pathologist, but many who see their own progress. And so assessing trainee performance and improvement is another area where large language models can be very useful to both the faculty as well as to the trainee. So for example, you could use a tool to extract resident responses compared to final diagnosis to see the convergence or the progress over time. And you might even be able to use that in a formal evaluation of pathologists as well. Well, we all love the story at Christmas time of A Christmas Carol, written by what AI thinks Charles Dickens looked like. But writing is sometimes a difficult skill for many trainees who have to work in a second language. And so again, AI can be our help. Now there are obvious tools like Grammarly or spell check that even are on your phone. But when you're working on an article or trying to write something, the AI tools can smooth out the difficulties, polish up the rocks, help to find the gold in those rocks so that it's easier to read. When you're working with a collaborative group and this person writes one section, another person writes another section, another person writes another section, I write differently than Anil or Andre or Jon, for Mr. Jon. And so we can use the AI tool to standardize or synthesize a more common tone and approach to that as well. So it can really improve the writing output. So this is Mark Zuckerberg. I think it might be a deep fake. And so trustability and verifiability is another issue where AI can be of very great value to us in teaching. Not so much in determining deep fakes or whatever, but rather in being able to use that synthetic data to create cases and examples and learning situations that don't violate patient privacy, overcome issues of numbers of cases or access to cases and so forth. So synthetic data sets can be very useful as training tools, especially in areas where we have limited numbers of slides or limited numbers of cases. And obviously, this is the U.S. Privacy Act is a big issue. If you have a rare case, certain age groups and so forth, you almost can't even put the image up because everybody knows, oh, that's what Donald Trump's squamous cancer looked like. So there are certain things like that. So here's an example, another similar to what Hill showed. You can see the synthetic images on the left, clinical, radiographic, pathologic, and really there's no meaningful difference between those. Additionally, you can use this kind of synthetic data to titrate diagnostic thresholds. So you can create a set of cases that would have some features but not all, and so forth, to test the ability of a trainee to identify and correctly include in their differential things where it wasn't a classic case with everything that you need to see. Well, I'm older than most of you, and I know that learning new tricks as you get older is not easy, but you shouldn't give up. And that brings us to thinking about these as tools. Some people's toolbox at home looks like this. My father was more organized than this, but I'm more like this. They're kind of a mess. But we're only as good as our tools, and there are so many tools, sometimes we don't know which ones to use. This is just some of the large language models that are available today. And I ran out, there's more. But as with any tool, the user and the tool have to be very comfortable. You have to validate that the tool is going to do what you need it to do. If I am a woodworker, my tools are very important. I take good care of them. I know their limits. I know what problems they're best to be used for, and I apply them to those situations. And I don't ask a hammer to do the job of a screwdriver. I don't ask a lathe to do the job of a saw. And the same is true with large language model tools. You have to learn the tool that is valuable for the task and make sure that you learn how to use it properly so that it can be effective and not a danger. Last year, there was a large study I was part of, a large paper that I was part of, that was the instructions or the validation parameters that should be used in machine learning and deployment of such AI tools. So become familiar with those, how you train people on those tools as you begin to apply these. Well, this is essentially summing up that wisdom. Embrace the new tools and use them, but use them cautiously and carefully until you feel comfortable with them before you deploy them into new situations where you have maybe a level of inexperience. This project was part of a multi-paper effort that is being published this year in the Archives of Pathology. There are 5 papers on the roles and uses of artificial intelligence in pathology. This paper on education, these are some of my co-authors, Eric Blassie, Scott Anderson, and others, Mike Ciccini, and so forth, that really taught me a lot about how to use these large language models in pathology, and I appreciate them. I made up a song about them, but we won't have needless to that. But this is the series that has been published in Archives, and our article here is the second one, Harnessing the Power of Generative Artificial Intelligence in Education. And I would encourage you to look at these other articles. Archives is an open access journal, no charge to use that, and the other articles are still forthcoming. So with that, Gaman going to Joey for Okay, Dr. Hunt.
Thank you very much for your very interesting presentation. I have a question. My student and us are doing a brainstorm research, and we use ChatGPT to ask to do brainstorm our research question, and ChatGPT give us a very good answer. And then we ask a deeper and more detailed questions. They also give us very good answer as well. So we try to figure out how to use that, but in a right manner, so we don't feel guilty. It's like with the blood.
Yeah, good question. Plagiarism and attribution. So if you're writing a paper and you have used that as part of your method, it's certainly acceptable to use that because you had to compose the prompt and so forth. And you know, reporting that you have used artificial intelligence tools in the preparation and how you use them. That's perfectly appropriate because we used it in our paper and we disclosed how we used it to unify style and search other references. So it's not considered plagiarism to use that material that you have generated out of the prompt, as long as you disclose it. That's the important thing. For the exam, I don't think it's important. I don't think it's. I mean, it depends on the exam, but it's not. I certainly wouldn't use it while it was in the exam. That would be plagiarism. And there's some risks there. I mean, we have looked at how well ChatGPT will do on, say, the pathology board exams, and it probably would pass, but it would not be maybe as good as you could do. Other questions? Okay.
Thank you very much. So, yeah, another round of applause to Dr. Hassel.